Anyway, the establishing shot, I got to mention a few things I think are really kind of fun. As an artist, this is a great example of using extreme three-point perspective, but I will say that I kind of find this being so askew as to give honor to the fact that so much weird stuff is happening in this, what you would think of as a sleepy small town. It's clearly got a lot of weird stuff going on. And something else that I think is kind of fun and worth mentioning is this appears to be, maybe it's not a cathedral, such a small town, but it's a beautiful church. And a lot of the churches, especially cathedrals, are usually laid out in the grid of a cross, always facing east. So the fact that it looks like it's getting to be dark or dusk, having the sun in the west means the church is facing the correct direction, and I find that to be really kind of fun. And for those who know, this looks to be an umbrella, which there's a guy called That Umbrella Guy who has a book which I will also be reviewing, and he's another interesting guy fighting the good fight to hopefully improve the state of comics. All right, so many asides. I'm starting to be like #1 Marmaduke fan. Yeah, 10 minutes, and I've gotten to like the third page. This will pick up. So anyway, we're introduced to a couple of characters already, and like I said, that this reads very cinematically. And I will say that we get the dun 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 as we find out. So we have our cop, who's his best friend in story terms. Officer Chua, who is a great sort of doctor's companion, knows how to move the story along without having our main character always being forced to say, "as we both know," which, is the terrible way to get exposition going. But the dialogue, for the most part, I think, is very serviceable to the ends of the story, and the characters are used very well. So what we find out, "Hey, Father Retter, I knew I'd find you up. Officer Chewitt's a little late for confession, don't you think? Early enough to miss the local watchdogs. Those things scare me." I gotta say, I'm not entirely sure. I've read it several times, and I know he winds up having a phobia of dog. But I'm not sure what the local watchdogs are. But I guess I don't really need to. "We need your help. It came in real handy last year. Recent string of suicides, they all have a commonality, but the forensics and nature require your expertise." So again, I just think that this would be great as making a TV show or whatever it is, Crackle, Netflix sort of thing. But hopefully you don't sell out too quick. But a good cut and reveal, as we see Father Retter here, who is investigating the occult. And of course, he is well armored with the presence of Christ always in his mind, along with his rosary and the Bible. So we already understand he knows a lot about the occult, but is taking care to be defensively minded against it, because the nature of these things is incredibly dangerous. So we got through our opening, and then I'm going to try and get through this really quickly. So we find out that there's these mysterious cases of suicide as they're being described, but what we'll find out is that various characters have shown up and have some of the trademarks of possession, where they have extreme strength. As we see here, one is described as a 100-pound kid slammed a 250-pound cop on his lunch break. Just beating the tar out of him. And then as they chase him down, he's found to be just a pile of ashes. And what we'll also find out is another case where a guy was causing trouble and apparently got in his car and whoosh, just again turned into ashes. At one point described as self-immolation, but also spontaneous combustion. So something very weird is going on. And in the midst of all these ashes, there's a commonality that they wind up finding an obsidian match that is in pristine, unburnt condition that they find out was ingested by all of these people. Now, that being said, we have two instances that we find out. This guy's wearing dog tags. This guy, which is the second case, we find that both of them were service members. You'll see as they're going through the funeral. That there's also a kind of a military connection, at least through these first two cases. There's the third case that we get into that we don't really see any action with. That is an older couple, and I don't know if there's any sort of connection. I don't know if there was an implication that there was supposed to be a stronger tie of military, because we'll find out that this priestly order is going to be made up of ex-military people who have been through hell, who theoretically have the armor built up of having lived through that experience. One thing I will say is that Tim Lim, as an artist, again, I think serves the function of telling a story very well, but he has a love of zipatone, which I think is fine in most cases, but sometimes I think it gets a little overused, especially considering the amount of coloring and the excellence of the coloring. But it's also possible at one point they thought this was going to be black and white. I'm not really sure about that. I've watched a whole bunch of Doug's videos over the time, and you should follow him on YouTube because he's got a lot of great things to say, interesting things to say. Now, I know the description is as a 100-pound kid, but that guy does not look like a 100-pound kid. He looks pretty ferocious. But all that being said, we're getting introduced to these weird happenings in a town of less than 12,000. And yeah, when we learn about the Lees, I guess that one of the other things that he mentions, they found, I guess, some scribblings one place or another about this big slug. And so we're getting evidence that maybe that there's a trace connection or things that are so weird. But this slug, again, is an object, an icon of a serpent. And one thing I will just say that I think one of the reasons why a serpent winds up getting used is that a serpent, it moves in an extremely strange way that has a kind of a hypnotic quality. And I think that this is a model of an idea that can enter into us. This is an aside on my part, but one of the reasons why I think that the serpent is such an iconic description of the demonic, or the devil himself, to be sure.